So, welcome to Calmly Coping. Tati here. I am here with Dr. JJ Kelly, and I'm excited for today's conversation. She is super passionate about educating people on emotional intelligence, which I think is a super important topic. And she goes by the Punk Rock Doc. So, I love that title. I'd love to hear more about that, how that title came to be.
Well, a couple of reasons. Sometimes it's just like ride the horse the way it's going. Punk, I've been into that since I was like 13 years old. So that just goes with the territory. But also, it's become, I work in dialectics, the Venn diagram. So I think of things in that Venn diagram like conformist, anti-conformist, but down the middle is like non-conformist. That's
Mm.
like true freedom kind of stuff. And that's sort of what I'm going for professionally. I did whatever 16 years trying to change the mental health system from within. And I just got so bogged down by all the isms in the mental health field. So I just like bailed and made my own company. And now I do my own thing. I don't do therapy anymore. I teach the emotional intelligence skills. And it's an alternative to
Hmm.
traditional psychotherapy is what I say, but that's punk as fuck. So
Yeah.
and
Awesome.
radical authenticity, that's what I sort of invite people, like, be your weirdo self. Don't spend energy trying to hide that shit from people. Like, just go do your thing, be free. So
Hmm. Yeah, and I can see definitely how in the mental health field there can be these like boxes and rules that people feel like we need to follow and be a certain way. And I'll even have clients with me, and maybe that's something I need to encourage more, where they like apologize for cursing or doing other things because they feel like, oh, there's certain rules, we have to do things a certain way. So is that something that you noticed, that maybe it seems like there was kind of a discomfort or resistance there to that for you?
yeah, for sure. And the doctor worship, like,
Mm,
doctor knows best, and you're sick and I've got all the answers. I don't like that hierarchy. That completely contributes to the patriarchy and whiteness and ableism. And like, no, it's a collaboration. Like, I'm definitely the expert on DBT and the emotional intelligence skills, but like, they're the expert on them. We
mhm.
have to work together.
Yeah.
And it's about improving quality of life, not just like going after the symptoms and the shit you're doing wrong, and then like we'll focus on that and we'll treat those symptoms. I don't like the medical model being applied to the human dynamics. They're just too fluid.
Mhm.
And diagnosing people who are like still in development and giving meds to kids whose brains are still developing, no, no, and no.
Mm.
Not into that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I definitely hear what you're saying. I think that there's a lot of, like you mentioned, the isms. So I was gonna come have a thought, but I have a question about, like, what do you mean by those isms? Can you tell me
Yeah,
more about that?
racism, sexism,
Mm,
homophobia,
mhm,
ableism, all of them.
mhm,
All the things we're trying to get rid of in society exist heavily in mental health. And
mm.
that's nuts because it that's not going to improve people's quality of life.
No.
I mean, Oakland, like, black folks can't find non-white, they can't find black therapists.
Mm,
They, and in a lot of people of color that come into the system have to play the white game or the elitist and some of it's just not, it's not great.
mhm. Yeah, so it sounds like you've noticed and that there exists a lot of the systemic oppression. It doesn't disappear in the field of mental health. Like, it's still apparent there.
No, and on top of that, doctorate a doctorate is more of a reflection of privilege than intelligence.
Mm,
Please,
yeah.
I want people to advocate for their own mental health and physical health. Like, don't, oh, what should I do? Like, go research it. yourself too, like advocate for yourself. The way that doctors blow off people of color, women, like,
Mhm.
and doctors are notorious for not listening.
Yeah. And would you say doctors, like medical doctors or any doctor?
I mean, yeah, I would say any MD
Mhm.
specifically, yes. But even shrinks, I say shrinks for like psychologists and psychiatrists.
Mhm.
There's so much narcissism in the field that it's like they just want to be right and like want the client to be like, "Oh yeah, thank you. You saved my life."
Mhm.
Like gross.
Mhm.
Not
So,
into that.
like, to worship them kind of and
Kind of. And like then they can go home and be like, "I'm a good person." See, everybody thinks so. The performance of a good person instead of just like being one.
Mm. So is that something that you've experienced? Because you mentioned going out of being in more of, like, the structured and, like, working for somebody else to then working for yourself. Is that part of the reason why you left that?
Big time. Yes. And it's too confining for somebody like me to, I do lectures and things like that, like Northern California psychiatric, I did all the straight stuff.
Mhm.
um but then the MDs would line up in the front while I'm lecturing, and they raise their hand for a question, which I'm down with. I love Q&A and the spontaneity of that. But they'd be like, "Well, when I was in Tibet with Thich Nhat Hanh," and like you get, this is not a chance for you to pontificate.
Mm.
Like the male privilege of it all. I'd be like, even in my early career, I'd be like, "So who's doing the lecturing here? You or me? Like, put your
Mm.
hand down. I'm not calling on you anymore. Does anybody have an actual question?"
Mhm.
Like, humor shame them into knocking it off. Like,
Mm.
men taking up all the space in the room? No, sorry. Thinking
Mhm.
that privilege means they had an easy childhood? They don't even know the definition of privilege, for God's sake. Like,
Mm.
what are we doing here?
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you said that, like, having a doctorate is more of a reflection of privilege because I think that many people don't acknowledge that there's a lot of luck that goes into getting to these levels of status or degrees, and that luck is just the situation you're born into.
Totally, totally. And their mouths drop. Not everybody goes 200 grand in debt to get a doctorate to do what they want to do. And then have the gall to say to me, "Well, let's not cancel student loans because, call me old fashioned, but I think if you take out a loan, you pay it back." Oh, really? So does that mean you paid back your PPP loan then?
Mm.
Oh, no, you took that money from the government. Like, what?
Mhm. So there's some hypocrisy going on there.
So much blinders on. It's just this very rigid way of thinking. And I'm in a very well known area for being open minded, and it's still here.
Mm.
So I just was like, okay, something has to be different. And I couldn't find it. So I was like, I got to make it. So I just started the company, and it's called Unorthodox, DOC,
Mhm.
because my advanced students who have been doing the emotional intelligence skills forever are more emotionally intelligent and happy than any doctoral level intern I ever supervised. So
Mm.
I called them the docs,
Mhm.
again, to dispel with absurdity and fun
Yeah,
this whole doctor worship hierarchy thing. And then they teach the younger ones coming up who've had less training, and they do peer coaching and we do community outreach. Like, it's super cool.
that's awesome.
So, yeah.
So
Yeah.
how I'm curious how you integrate the privilege piece, the trying to bring awareness to that into the emotional intelligence piece.
Well, the whole thing about the emotional intelligence training is I have skills that I teach you so that you can act in accordance with your values, regardless of whether you're emotionally activated or not. Because
Mm.
that's when we get act the asshole, right? We get emotionally activated and then we don't know how to manage that effectively. So then we react from that emotional place and then we cause messes that bite us in the ass later, right?
Mm. Mhm.
So the core of it is we don't have to agree on values. We have a mutual respect that I use the skills according to my values and you do it for yours. And those don't have to overlap and it works anyway. So
Mhm.
then, if you're in a regular practice and discipline of acting according to your values, you're going to walk around with a higher sense of self confidence and self esteem and just pride and positive regard for yourself. And you're going to act right in the world. And if
Mhm.
everybody does more of that, then there's less shame and more self confidence. And then, yeah, happy people act right. So
Yeah.
it's just going to be a better place. And I see that with the docs. And they spread, they get whole as an individual. And then the natural overflow of that is wanting to give, wanting to be generous, wanting to teach. And they naturally do that. And they're models for happiness and self respect in the world. So the ripple is just ongoing. It's so rad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome and it makes a lot of sense and I can see how maybe people who are in that place like you mentioned like the doctors who are narcissists and maybe not acknowledging that, student loans are an issue or things like that are themselves don't know how to process their emotions or coming from a place of being defensive or
Yes. Defensiveness is such a thing. That word, it's surprising to me how many, even people in the field, how many people don't understand the full extent of that. Like, if my job is to challenge people's, stories and bullshit, then they say something defensive, and I'm like, well, that was pretty defensive. And they're like, I'm not being defensive.
Mhm.
That sentence is defensive, dude.
Mhm.
Like, I feel attacked. Oh, I guess I just can't disagree with you, JJ. I'm like, come on, man. Like, name your emotions. Okay, if this challenge is making you feel what? Like defensive is behavior from the fear camp usually.
Mhm.
Like, are you startled? Are you surprised? Are you shocked? Are you like ashamed?
Yeah.
Afraid that I'll find something out about you that you're trying to hide from even yourself. Like, which is what we're here for. And people understand that intellectually. But when it actually happens, sure, they're going to have an emotion, but you don't believe every thought you have when you're emotionally activated. You have to, emotional intelligence is separating those thoughts from fact and from feeling, knowing that feelings generate those thoughts and they may or may not be true.
Mhm.
You got to
Yeah.
like get back to your baseline and then evaluate whether they're true or not. You don't do it when you're like, woo, on a hump.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and I think it's the reality, unfortunately, that many people don't have that knowledge or education on how to manage their emotions.
yeah.
And I'm always curious to hear people's perspectives on like why do you think that is? And of course, you may not be able to answer exactly, but what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's changed. I mean, it's mind blowing that so few people have any emotional intelligence. It's getting trendier now. I've worked with, Google execs and, we have Silicon Valley right here. And these companies, they're like, my opinion is they talk about emotional intelligence a lot more than they have any. Like it's part of that corporate jargon now, but they're not actually practicing it. Um, so it's getting trendier, but that isn't making people's lives better. So it's not actual emotional intelligence, but why doesn't it exist in the first place? Mind blowing.
Mhm.
I think patriarchy is a big reason for that because feelings are seen as more, they're feminized. And,
Mm.
women aren't as valuable in the culture, in a patriarchal culture. So anything that's related to women is going to be devalued. I think for the most part, that's been historically true. I mean, maybe the 70s started to change that. And it's certainly being talked about more now. I mean, the pandemic did illuminate the fact that nobody has any emotional intelligence, and we better get some in case there's another one or we're going to murder our families,
Mhm.
like so the problem of course is that, in my opinion, is that now people are flooding the mental health system, but I think it's terribly flawed and doing harm as is. So now people know they need it, they're going to ask for it, and I still would argue they're not getting it.
Mm. So why do you think it's terribly flawed, the mental health system?
The isms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, including narcissism.
Mm.
The inmates are running the asylum kind of shit.
Mhm. So you think that the mental health professionals themselves maybe don't have emotional intelligence, aren't addressing their own bias, privilege, etc.
Yes, that is absolutely what I think.
Mm.
Bummer.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote my dissertation in like '06 about how DBT and emotional intelligence skills should be taught in school so we can get ahead of all these diagnoses and meds, and but now it's a money making industry.
Mm.
Medicating people, big pharma's real.
Yeah.
So now I think there are maybe there always were money motivations and I just was too young to see it or something, but it
Mhm.
certainly seems like it's a money motivated thing now.
So to not educate people on emotions, like
Yes,
children.
just give 'em
Mm.
make them buy pills, make them dependent on things,
Yeah.
food and shopping and ways to self-medicate sadness, fear, loneliness, disconnection from other humans, free thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a shame. I also think it's geared toward keeping Black people in a permanent underclass. I certainly think that's a part of it.
Mm. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah,
So
yes, it is. Yes, it is. You asked.
Yeah, but I think that do you think it's something that is intentional, or do you think that it's something that people are just so focused on making money, on helping themselves that it's just not important?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think certainly it's not on the radar of a lot of people. They get myopic because fear kind of closes in your perspective. If you think you're in survival mode and all you need to do is like make money and then you just keep doing that when you have money, okay. But do I think it's intent? Yeah, I certainly think it's intentional, higher up.
Mm.
Yes, I do.
Mhm. So how do you think this affects the person who's looking for mental health support and maybe they're not aware of what's happening?
Yeah, I think they take the first person they get and they
Mhm.
think they're supposed to be grateful for it. They don't shop around like a consumer. I mean,
Mm.
I don't do therapy anymore for obvious reasons. I do coaching stuff, self betterment shit all the time, but I don't go to therapy anymore. The last couple of times, years ago, when I did, I was like, I'll be like 10 minutes in and be like, you know what? I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to go and don't charge me for this
Mm. How come?
because it clearly was not a match.
Okay.
No, I'm not going to be talked at. Like I'm just very quick to advocate for myself. And I wish everybody did that because shop,
Mm.
because it gets harder from there. you're going to dig in. If I have a connection with somebody right away and we start work together, thank goodness, because that's what gets us through when we start digging in, and defensiveness is a natural thing. If we've got some respect and trust on board already, and some like authentic ways of relating to each other, then they can hopefully and usually still trust me even when they're really activated. And then we can get through what I call the shit tunnel.
Mm.
You got to keep moving
Mhm.
through it. There's no way really to avoid it or go around it. It kind of gets worse before it gets better, because we're going after your defense structure,
Yeah.
your regular defenses that you need to drop in order to change and get happier and freer. And nobody gives out their defenses without a fight.
Mm.
So,
So would you say, because you mentioned before things like self-medicating and other methods, or those ways that people kind of keep those defenses up?
yeah. And I don't think most people do it consciously.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get by.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think unfortunately, and also in my experience, that, you know, clients or people who are seeking out support for mental health, emotional intelligence, they're not aware of what they might like be looking for, or what kind of support they might need. And I think the process of asking for help in general is so challenging, that then to be met with, I've heard of so many people saying they reach out and they never get a response because the mental health system is so overloaded right now, or it wasn't a good fit. And so then I think that can be discouraging to people.
Sure.
So then they're like, I don't even know what to do. I feel stuck. I feel overwhelmed.
And then if they get in, it's often expensive. And those
Mhm.
of us that are good at it I haven't taken insurance in I don't know how many years. Like, cuz they don't pay us either.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing is really expensive. And okay, to if it's shorter, yeah, get what you pay for, okay, make the investment in yourself. But then you don't know what you're getting. You're going to drop thousands of dollars on no change, or like constant aggravation every time you go in, or feeding somebody's ego, or whatever it ends up being.
Hmm.
And there are no guarantees. You drop the money and you hope. And you're like, oh, well, the doctor must know what they're doing. Not
Hmm.
always. No.
Yeah, it's true. So what do you think, what is the difference between what you're describing as therapy and that emotional intelligence training or coaching? I'm not sure what you call it.
Well, it's, I teach 8 weeks of classes, like they're classes, and you learn the skills, you practice them all week, and then we meet and we tweak them for, individual differences. What meets your personal needs and what matches your values and that kind of a thing. And after the 8 weeks, you can go.
Hmm.
Like, you know where to find me if there's a crisis. If you want to continue, we can do an intermediate level, sure, whatever. But there are lots of different options, and it's pretty important to me that it gets less expensive the more time you want to spend with me.
Mm,
Because
interesting.
I had parents when I was in private practice and group practice, parents were paying me like 2 grand, 3 grand a month for years. I don't think that's the way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you got the money, great, whatever, do what you want with it. But like, people without that kind of disposable income need help too.
Absolutely.
So I just don't like that model. Like, I want to offer you, like, if you don't want, if you're like, I want to keep working with you, I'm not going to be like, sayonara. I mean, sure, okay, here are your options, and there are different price levels, and there are different options, and it's just geared more toward independence. I don't like the dependency that comes with the current mental health system.
Mm. Yeah. So it sounds like the focus is more on teaching people skills and tools that they can use so they don't need to be dependent upon you or
Yeah.
any other therapist or professional.
Yeah. And it's according to their values. They don't have to get external validation from some authority figure. No, you got to trust your gut and your own heart and your own sense of what your values are and how you want to live your life and honor those with your behaviors,
Mhm.
regardless of what anyone else says.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an important perspective. And you brought up things like authenticity and nonconformity. And a lot of my audience I know struggles with anxiety and feeling like other people are judging them. And so that can get in the way of feeling comfortable being yourself
Yes,
and doing things that align with your values. So what would you suggest for somebody who's in that place?
they are judging you. That's a
Okay.
reality. Like, don't spend your time worrying about it. Like, people are judging you. Do you know how many people are talking shit about me right now? I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter when you have that grounded sense of self because you have a practice of behaving in ways that match your values on the daily.
Mhm.
Then you are so solid in who you are, you're still going to have fears. There's no getting rid of fear. And I think there's a big difference viscerally and honestly about saying, I have anxiety today instead of like I'm scared shitless to go to work today. I'm really scared. Or boy, this level of joy makes me feel kind of vulnerable. Or going to get a professional makes me nervous. Like naming those emotion words instead of just pathologizing it with like anxiety and depression. I have depression today. Well, today depression doesn't come and go, but based on the day. It's a diagnosis, it's a disorder, whatever with those words, but it's a sustained shit show. You're scared of something, you're sad today. Like, let's not pathologize even the natural emotional responses.
Mm.
But people that chronically worry, there can be a lot of different kinds of fuel for that fire, such as straight up worrying, like OCD's kind of just worrying about things and being attached to outcome. Um, and just like fear of the unknown, there's nothing more natural than that.
Yeah.
So, you notice the thoughts, you name the emotions, you get yourself back to baseline, and then you problem solve. What do I do about fear? Do I take a walk? Do I take 3 deep abdominal breaths? Do I distract myself with a positive activity? There are all kinds of problem solving things to do there. But I think a lot of times those don't even work in the moment because people are not validating their fear first before they problem solve. And shrinks taught them problem solve. But first, you got to like meet yourself where you are with it and then decide how you want to move forward. But there are sneaky things too. Like I just naturally discovered that people that were coming to me for help with panic attacks, when we would do anger work, they had stuffed anger, like years of it.
Mm.
And it was starting to overflow in them and they were having panic attacks trying to keep a lid on all that rage.
Mm.
We do the anger work, the panic attacks are now gone.
Interesting.
Zero. That just came up. I didn't know that it existed. Shame too. Hiding from shame can spike anxiety too.
Mhm.
So, you do the shame work, bring it forward, quit hiding out from it. We can talk about it. It's a consequence free environment. I mean, pretty much. I might make fun of you to try and make light of what you're holding all kinds of shame about because it's not that big of a deal.
Mm.
We all fuck up, like, relax.
Mhm.
Here, listen to this story about me when I was your age. You'll feel a ton better, like just kind of normalizing a lot of it. Because the messaging coming from society is like, you're never good enough, you never work hard enough, everything's out of your control. Well, a lot of it is,
Mhm.
but not everything. And you're not messed up for being scared. I don't think there's I think a lot of fear, natural fear is pathologized. And I think if we just like listen, listen to people and help with an open heart and sometimes just don't say much. Just give them the space to talk about it. I do that until they start repeating. Then it can get a little self-harmy to ruminate with
Mhm.
fears. And then I'll start to disrupt that thought pattern. But I let them say it all first because
Mhm.
I'm still, I have to gather information about them too in order to help them effectively.
Yeah.
So I let them talk, and a lot of times they'll run themselves out too, or they'll catch themselves. Well, I guess that one's kind of dumb. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, but that one wasn't. So what should we do about that one?
Yeah.
And just taking it easy on people. There's so little self compassion. And when they say, like, I call it verbal cutting, when they say something terrible about themselves, I can't believe the number of smart people that call themselves stupid. If they're
Yeah.
doing that in my presence, I know that's the tip of the iceberg. So now I got to go after, we have to do something about this negative self-talk because that is so normalized in society, even sort of like, oh, good job being that tough on yourself. You're going to be a real producer and achiever. No,
Mm.
that kind of thing erodes self esteem faster than anything else.
Yeah.
That has to full on stop. No
Mhm.
one, even personally in my life, is permitted to talk like that about themselves in my presence. I just don't, I have like zero tolerance with so few things. That's one of them.
Yeah, and I agree. It's so normalized and it's so harmful. And people just think, it's so I think it's so automatic. People don't even realize they're doing it most of the time.
Totally. So then, but then they go get help. They're trying to build up self esteem while eroding it faster than it can be built up. And then they're paying money. Like there are some very simple things that we can all do, like that.
Mhm.
Naming your emotions, stopping the negative self talk. When you catch yourself doing it, don't shame yourself for doing it. Congratulate yourself for catching it. And then insert a mantra, even. I approve of myself. I'm always doing the best I can. I'm getting better every day. Now, those things are cheesy. Yes, I think the world needs more cheese, but
Yeah.
that's a problem solving technique that comes after validation. It's one of many. I don't think just saying I approve of myself all day long is going to do it. That's for the toxic positivity folks to sell.
Yeah.
I think it's one of a toolbox of tools that can come in handy because in that case, when you're just trying to disrupt the thoughts, any other thought will do. So just do the mantra. You're just trying to occupy your mind on something healthy instead of unhealthy just in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm hearing that it's really validation and naming the emotion and r- kind of investigating what's going on there rather than you mentioned not pathologizing. And I notice people do that a lot. And, um, even in myself specializing in working with people with anxiety, that there can be this label of, and that's always something that I kind of have issues with because I think people like to not like to, but people tend to say I'm depressed or I'm anxious and it's this permanent state of who they are versus like you were pointing out, maybe I'm feeling nervous today or I'm feeling down.
Mhm.
And I'm curious your thoughts on like what can be the negative impacts of going to that place of pathologizing.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's the permanence. Like I always tell people just suspend your certainty because certainty is bullshit anyway. That doesn't exist. I mean, we don't do black and white in DBT and in emotional intelligence training because it's all gray. So you're putting that stamp on it, and anytime someone is so certain, rock solid certain about something, what's the impact of that? Then they stop exploring, stop being curious about that topic because they got that locked up. So boom, in a shelf, never to be looked at again.
Mm.
It's exactly that. It makes it a permanent thing that you don't even look at. You don't think you need to problem solve about. I mean, that's the reason the isms exist in mental health. Everybody thinks they got it. They got the education on it. They got a doctorate in it. They know. Yeah, they know because they read it in a book. They don't practice it themselves, so they don't actually know. If they knew, they would be happy and they would like themselves and it would show.
Yeah.
But I'm depressed. And there's an offload of responsibility with that too. That kind of languaging. It's like, well, so I don't have to do anything about it.
Mhm.
It's like this fake excuse to back away from the thing that they fear, which is going forward, which is valid. It's okay to fear it. Courage is doing it anyway. You got to, let's have Brave Week. I'll be like, oh, this is the month of Brave. Let's do that. This is a week of Brave. Every time you're scared, if the thing isn't going to kill you, go toward it.
I like that.
And that is a practice. Courage is a practice. And that's gaining some traction mainstream to this idea of being brave and being courageous. I am happy about that because, I've been talking about that a long time. And it seems like a very simple concept that people would grasp. But again, they think they do, and then they don't practice it. They don't do the thing that's
Mhm.
courageous. They just talk about courage.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a theory, it's a practice. And I think that's why the DBT and the emotional intelligence skills training works, is because it's a practice. We don't just talk about it. I don't just listen. You learn skills, you practice them all week, then you come and we tweak them together. And then you build some more skills on top of that. And every week builds on itself.
Mhm.
So then by the end of the 8 weeks, you have already practiced 2 months worth of skills and they're part of your daily life. That's why it works.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it
plus
makes
it's
a lot of
fun.
sense.
And it's nothing if anybody doesn't know already, too. They just know it. They don't know it and do it. It's not an intellectual or academic process. It's a practice.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
life,
I'm sorry. I
I
think that oh, sorry.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. We're talking
No, no,
over
no.
each other now.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm done.
Okay. No, I think I was gonna say I think that that focus on the practice is so important because there's even, therapists or people who are trained in mental health where they cognitively know this, but if you're not putting these things into practice, then nothing's going to change. And I think that can put people in a place of feeling like they have more control and more responsibility when you're taking action versus being in that helpless place of I have anxiety, I have depression. This is just the way I am.
Yeah. We call that ragdoll.
Mm,
Ragdoll. Help, help. Or like possum, playing possum.
mm,
Like, and in DBT, that's called willfulness. It's trying to impose your will on reality instead of accepting reality for what it is, even when it's shitty and you don't have to like it.
mhm.
You just have to accept what it is in order to change it or yourself within it.
Yeah.
You can't sit around shoulding, oh, it should be like this. Well, yes, I don't disagree with you. It absolutely should. And it isn't. So we got to problem solve within that reality for you.
Mhm,
Can't sit around wishing. Come on. That's like children do that. That's not what grown people do.
mhm. And I'm curious how that applies to being in the place of the isms and the privilege, because I can definitely see how that can feel like "Well, I have no control over this and kind of helpless to these biases and these oppressive symptoms or systems that are continuing to affect people. How is it possible to go to a place of that willfulness, or is it just the acceptance?
I let me see if I've got you, if I'm correct in my thinking about the question. So,
Yeah,
are you talking about the sense of powerlessness and ragdolling that comes with being a person that's in an oppressed system?
exactly. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, oh yeah. I just and do you want to give in? It just seems like they win if we do that. And for people that have privileges, for white people and people who come from money or whatever, like what I say with the people that I work with, I'm like, yes, oh my gosh, this is so hard. We had a completely red day with the fires. Like the sky was red in
Mm,
the morning. I mean, I had a coaching call. I just called one. I was like, for anybody that's freaking out, let's just have a coaching call, all of us together.
yeah.
It's COVID and then red morning. Like what? It seems so apocalyptic, people are gonna ragdoll or freak out. So I was like, okay, I don't think any of us have the luxury of giving up hope. I think for us, we want to be leaders in our community. We are emotionally intelligent. We do, many of us have privilege. I mean, all of us have some privileges, but there are a lot of queer kids, kids of color, that are in, every single person I work with is pretty much in like a system that's being oppressed in some way by society.
Mhm.
So I'm like, we have to validate our fear, validate our momentary powerlessness. We're going to talk to each other. You certainly can vent here to a certain extent. And then we're going to pick ourselves up off the floor. Go ahead, cry. Yep, let it out, bitch, whatever.
Mhm.
And then we're going to pick ourselves up and we're going to keep fighting the fight because that's what we do here. That's what we all have signed on for in this organization, to be models for the positive impact of emotional intelligence skills.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
let's do that. We don't get to give up. We know the skills. We have to help others with our knowledge because that's privilege. And that's using your privilege to better all of humanity. Privilege isn't dirty just because you have it. I can't change the fact that I'm white.
Mhm.
I can, however, ask myself the hard questions of how I've contributed to whiteness unintentionally. Sure, but still did it. Still, have privilege and get treated differently for that privilege that is unearned.
Mm.
There are ways to use privilege for good and betterment of humanity. Sitting around in the Berkeley Hills being like, oh, I have everything, I suck. Like, don't do that. Don't do that white guilt shit.
Mm.
Activate yourself in the betterment of all.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And like you mentioned, asking yourself the hard, the uncomfortable questions, because I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to think about and to reflect upon.
And too
And
bad. So what? Like,
Mhm.
that's the difference between the performing being a good person and actually being one. Come on, you don't get to just cherry pick the information that you like and then say you're an advocate of people. No, it includes the asking yourself the hard questions.
Yeah.
And if I don't do it with me, what am I modeling for clients and all the youth of the area that come to me for help?
Yeah.
I mean, what a honor that anybody of color would come to me. That's crazy. I don't know that I would do that. I mean, for me, if once I know me, but then I want, they've been to a bunch of them before. I'm like, the courage to even try one more is outstanding.
Mhm.
So I just think that if we sit around worrying or sit around feeling ashamed or guilty or whatever. I just think that's sort of the willfulness. There's some sort of willful, gross self-indulgence in that.
Mm. Yeah, and I love the perspective of starting from within, like working on those emotional intelligence skills from yourself. And like you said, it's going to help others and you can teach it to others. I'm curious because I'm sure that a lot of people listening might have this situation where maybe they're working on themselves, but a family member, partner, child maybe is resistant to hear these
Oh my
suggestions or want to make these changes. What would
welcome
you
to my world,
suggest?
dude.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we can't change other people. And there's a surrender and acceptance in that. And that is so much easier said than done. Again, it's a practice. And we validate the urge to like teach the skills or use the jargon from DBT with others, when you can see a better way and you see someone that you love just messing up in the same way over and over, of course it hurts you, it makes you scared for them, whatever. But nobody likes unsolicited advice, man.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many people give it when everyone knows no one likes it, unsolicited advice. So you have to wait for them to ask. That's what I do. I think everything I say is brilliant, but it's garbage if it doesn't help somebody or if it's ill timed, meaning they didn't ask me for it.
Mhm.
And being quiet, thinking you're right all the time, like that's a practice too. And it gets easier, like anything that you practice. But preaching at people doesn't work. I mean, look at our country.
Mhm.
It's listening that's going to get the job done because that's an act of love.
Yeah.
Like screaming at somebody or, like lording information over them, being the smarter one or what, more emotionally intelligent. Like, nobody's going to listen to that. That's not palatable. And if I cannot do that, anybody else cannot do that, dude. And
Mhm.
I and not doing that is easier anyway. Like I don't expend energy in that way. I save it for myself and for the people that want the information. I'm not going to go beat myself against a wall, like my head against a wall trying to change somebody that doesn't want to change. So tolerance becomes the way and just like letting go. I don't know. You have a spiritual practice or you can like pray for them or send them good vibes or one of the skills is opposite action. If they're pissing you off, maybe like make them a card
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
you so that you can dump the frustration
Mhm.
and then do something that matches your values, which is generosity.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to do with someone who's actively pissing you off in the moment. Yet it's an interesting experiment
Mm.
of freeing yourself from the frustration that comes with not being able to change people. And how the hell do you know that you're right anyway? Like, I have very strong opinions, and I don't know that I'm right. I know what I've seen over 20 years. Certainly, I honor my expertise, yet, that's everybody's different.
Yeah.
So I have to wait for someone to confirm that what I just said was useful to them. Did it resonate in you? I can watch them and see. And, the trained ones will be like, oh, yeah, that one hit.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, let's go down that road then. Or they'll stay silent. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that I'm wrong about that. And they're like, yeah, that's not really. I'm like, okay, garbage. Let's move on. Let's go somewhere else. Like if I model not being egotistically attached to being right.
Mm. And like rigid.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it's not about me. It's about whatever information I have that can help them. If I'm
Mhm.
sitting around wanting to be right all the time and taking people's money for that, gross. That does not match my values.
Yeah.
That's not modeling leadership.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I Feel like I could talk about this all day. The time
No
kinda just
kidding.
flew by.
Yeah, it's like exhilarating, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can
Mhm.
feel the flow even between us, which is
Mhm.
cool too. You have a great, like, radio voice. It
Oh,
is
thank you.
calming. You have a really
It
calming.
it's funny because people say that, and I did a recording for a client of a guided meditation, and she's like, "It didn't even matter what you were saying, your voice was just so calming."
Nice. You can just read recipes on an audiogram, and people are like, "Ah, yes, drift off to sleep."
Yeah, yeah, that would be
Nice.
that's a great idea.
That's cool.
Yeah, but
I
this was
myself shout every interview, so whatever. I appreciate the calm voice.
No, but this was a great conversation, definitely super important, and I know that my listeners are gonna find it really valuable.
Good.
If anybody wants to connect with you further, learn more about you, how can they do that?
It Everything is listed on drjjkelly.com. My Insta has a ton of free stuff. And it's all the stuff with me, the books, everything, the courses is named DRJJKELLY somewhere. So if you just go to the website, it gives you all the links to everything.
Okay, perfect, and I will leave the links for all of that in the show notes as well.
Cool.
All right, well,
Thanks
thank
so
you
much.
so much for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was a pleasure.